just saw a sign go live into my.
Okay, so we should be live here, my friend. Mr. Brian Scrone, can you see us live on your phones? Justin, get a chance to see us live here?
Yeah, let me check and make sure everyone's hearing us okay.
Hey, if you can hear us, we are so sorry. We have a few technical difficulties here that we are working through. We are with you now. And we should be on the page now. It's locked. Why does it say locked? Yeah, you see it's locked. Edit privacy. Okay, hold on a sec. Public. Okay. It's locked. Edit privacy. Okay, hold on a sec. Okay, so let's see now if this works. If we are live and public.
Yeah, I'm just waiting on my end to see if he can see us.
Let's see here. Okay, yeah, there's one person there. I think we are live.
Alive?
We are alive. We're not just live. We are alive. Finally.
I love it.
So it looks like somebody's on there, I guess, that maybe can hear us. Whoever's on there, maybe you can just give us a ping here, like a thumbs up or a heart or something. Let us know that you can actually hear us okay and see us okay. And then we will get going here.
Oh, we went back down now, so. We had a live one and we lost him.
We had a live one. Up. Okay, we're public now. Looks like we're pretty good at this point. Yeah,
I'm asking him. So why don't we just start? And
so I had this great question lined up for you. You know, it was epic. So let me go back to this epic question here for you. And it was really, how did you come to even realize that you should focus on what matters most? I mean, a lot of us try and do that in our lives. A lot of us think we're doing this in our life. A lot of us, have built a life where we feel like we're focused on what matters most, but actually our actions don't really demonstrate that. Our choices, it's like we want to be focused on what matters most. We want that thing to be the thing we're most, preoccupied for and that we live for. And yet at the end of the day, maybe we're not quite living up to that. So how did you kind of have this revelation that you should focus on this in your life?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me, David. I appreciate it. And to start off, I don't have it all figured out. So I think just to be transparent, yeah, I mean, this whole thing of, what matters most and me writing the book and talking about these 5 relationships it's a process, not an event, right? Again, I don't have it. Yeah, David is, we're getting a note that he is not seeing us.
He's not seeing us, and yet there's one person that's on here. This is interesting. So who is watching us then? There's somebody out there that can see us and hear us. Just give us a little bit of love here. There's 2 people that I have.
No, he's actually saying it's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
We are alive.
We're good. We're alive, but we're having trouble accepting it, I think. But welcome, everyone. We are asking questions, or interesting question about what matters most, and how Brian has kind of screwed this up, but he's still trying.
Hey, Justin, thanks for joining, and thanks for helping us with the tech there. So to answer your question, David, yeah, I don't have it all figured out, but I will say that I'm really conscious about my priorities and how I invest my time. So that's really the whole messaging. Hey, James, thanks for joining us. That's really my whole messaging throughout the book, is that this whole thing called life is a process and not an event, right? But with that said, there are these 5 universal relationships that I had presented to me 20 plus years ago from a really, really solid mentor that we hired as a life coach, a business coach. Mm-hmm. And he talked about these 5 relationships, and they're faith, fitness, family, friends, and finance. And everyone in the world, people in France, people in Florida, all the listeners all over the world are touching these 5 relationships. So they're universal, they're borderless. And I have found that there's a congruency gap or a disconnect. And this is speaking from personal experience. This is not prescribing or pointing the finger at anyone, that most of us have a disconnect between what we're telling ourselves are our priorities around those 5 relationships and then how we're investing our time. So the takeaway or the goal and some of the tools that I share in the book are to help the reader or the viewer get crystal clear on their priorities around those 5 relationships. And again, there's no right or wrong. It's totally subjective. It's totally personal. But once you get clear on how you line up those 5 relationships and how you prioritize them, then you can invest your time accordingly. We have a saying in the book, let's figure out what matters most for you before we worry about what's next. Because as human beings and as entrepreneurs and as creative people, we're always constantly looking ahead of ourselves, which is great to have vision, right? I don't want to take away from that. But the rub or the challenge is to take a step back and get crystal clear on how you prioritize those 5 relationships, and then you can worry about how you invest your time. And that's the takeaway from the book. This is totally personal. It's totally subjective. I would never tell people how to prioritize those 5 relationships. I'm always open about how I do, and from my experience, how it works for me, and people can take or agree or disagree with that. But at the end of the day, everyone's touching these 5 relationships, and so I think that it's very useful.
What are the 5 again, Brian? Can you give that again?
So they're the 5 F's, and once you hear them once or twice, they'll really sink in because they're easy to remember. So the 5 F's are faith, fitness, family, friends, and finance. And for the most part, that's touching all areas of our life. I talk about fun and flow as bonus chapters at the end of the book, because if we're not having fun and there's not a flow to these things, then obviously, that you're going to have bumps and bruises. So the way I present them, David, and again, I don't want to prescribe, but I find that, and thanks to everyone for joining us. I see people joining as we're talking.
Who's on here? I can see numbers. I can't see who's on here on this Be Live thing there. Say hello to us. Who's out there?
I see James Williams coming in. Justin
in London. My buddy
awesome.
James. Thanks for joining us, James.
Yeah, so I just see when they comment. But the way I prioritize those relationships for me is the way I presented them to you, is how I prioritize them. Again, I don't want to prescribe, but I have found from experience, David, that if I have faith, if I'm in tune spiritually with myself, and this has nothing to do with religion, no dogma here. What I'm talking about is self-love, nurturing and loving on myself, being able to forgive myself. Those other 4 relationships of fitness and family and friends and finance flow a lot easier, and I have a lot more fun in all of those areas. So I have taken very seriously, but with a sense of humor, myself and how I'm loving on and nurturing myself. Because if I'm putting myself first, and not in a narcissistic or a vain way, but in a self-loving way, and I believe it to be a very spiritual way, that I'm going to come home, I'm going to be the best family guy that I can be. I'm going to be the best father, husband. I'm going to be the best friend that I can. My businesses are going to flow a lot smoother, and I'm going to be able to serve my communities in a much more nurturing and sustainable way. So that's how I prioritize them. And giving talks around the world and sharing the tools from the book with people. I can say humbly that, that these relationships are completely borderless. Everyone's touching them. They're timeless. Everyone's going to be touching them 100 years ago if you and I had this conversation, and 100 years into the future. These relationships are not going anywhere. So the idea is to help everybody get clear on their own personal priorities around these relationships, and then we can help them decide how they want to invest their time.
Yeah, and I think the reading through the book, because for those of you who have not had the opportunity to to appreciate that Brian has actually released a book about what matters most, which we'll share the link at the talk. We'll put it into the comment section. In the book, there's actually really an exercise, which is it seems pretty obvious, but I didn't really find it that obvious, really. Prioritizing the the 5 F's. So really for you, what is the order of most importance of the 5 F's? Is faith most important? Fitness, family, friends, or finance? Not only what's the most important, but then what is the order? Because I found myself kind of in the place of, well, is it because I take care of myself in different ways? I take care of my relationships that the rest kind of falls into place? Or is it this unerring belief? Or is it, is it because my finances are okay? What is actually trying to prioritize that for me? And I've never been good at multiple choice tests, that's for sure. Was actually not so obvious. I know what's important to me, but choosing between those a bit is a bit tricky. So how would you suggest to somebody who kind of feels that, these things all have a certain high level of importance in your life? It's like if they're like stools to a table, right?
Yeah.
And in a table where, like, if one of them's not there, the table is, wobbly.
Absolutely.
So how would you guide somebody to actually even come up with a prioritization? Because I'm sure, and I'd love anyone who's on here to give your your list of what your order is between these 5. What's number 1 in your life? Is it faith, fitness, family, finance, or friends? And what is next? What is next? What is next? It's tricky. I'm like wanting to fit into the paradigm almost, and yet totally appreciating the value of it. So just want to hear you ask that. And then we have a question from James we can get to.
Yeah, so I think your question is a great question, and ultimately what it comes down to, David, is time, right? Time is our most precious asset. The good news is that we all have the same amount of time. Last I checked, there's 24 hours in a day, right? So if we're listening to our doctors and we're getting about 8 hours of sleep, that leaves us with about 16 waking hours. And so this is really ultimately what it all comes down to. It ties back to looking at those 5 relationships, which again are universal, and then looking at how you're investing your time. You and I use this analogy of the homeless guy that lives under the bridge in Paris or in Florida where I am.
Yeah.
The president of the United States, the prime ministers of all the countries around the world, we all have these same 16 waking hours. So it's an even playing field. That's the good news for everybody, right? We all have this even playing field. We wake up, our feet hit the floor in the morning, and we have this beautiful gift from God, and this has nothing to do with religion. Call it whatever you want. Gift from the universe, gift from God, gift from Buddha, with this thing called a free will. And we have this time that we have to play with and invest with on a daily basis. And as we move through life, our priorities do change. That's a reality. If you just had a brand new baby, you're going to be probably spending a lot of time on nurturing and loving on and protecting that baby. So again, there's no right or wrong here, but tying back and answering your question, it really, really comes down ultimately to figuring out what matters most, getting clear on your priorities, and then let's figure out what's next for you. Totally subjective, totally personal. What I do recommend, and not prescribing, but everyone in today's day and age has some kind of calendar that they're using to organize their days, right? Whether it's a to-do list, you're using Google Calendar on your smartphones, which I know a lot of people are now with technology. You can actually look at your day and say, okay, I got these 16 waking hours today. If I'm telling myself that these are my priorities, so for example, for me, speaking from experience, if I'm telling myself that faith is faith, and this ties and will answer James's question, faith for me is all about self-love. He asked the question, what is the relationship when you're working on yourself? That really ultimately is faith for me. And then they all tie in, which we can talk about. But faith for me is relationship with self, and relationship with whatever your higher power is, irregardless of your religion. So again, I find that when I'm taking care of and nurturing on myself, for example, it's 9:30 in the morning here. So before I got on the phone with you, I kissed my family, and I went and had some time. I did some yoga, some meditation, and I worked out. And that's where flow comes in, because I was nurturing myself, working on myself and my faith, but I also got a really good sweat in. I was out in Mother Nature. So there is a flow to this. We compartmentalize these 5 relationships of faith, fitness, family, friends, and finance. And then there's a flow to life. I mean, everyone would agree with that. That's my Italian coming out. And
it depends probably on the moment or the phase, or the urgency, or the particular, experience that you're going through. Maybe what one may take probably more precedence or priority over another. I can totally see it as being a dynamic, functioning, like puzzle almost. At the same time, like I know what's so important for you is that all of these things have to be humming at certain levels so that they're always there and present in your life, and that there's a certain semblance of continuity, and that you're building something, and that you're growing, and you're progressing, and you're not damaging family, relationships, health, even if you're prioritizing. Because a lot of very successful entrepreneurs, business people, real estate people, and I'm sure there's value in this still for people who are, achieving a lot, who have ambitious goals, who are making certain conscious sacrifices in relationships and these types of things. How do you, let's say for high achievers, how do you apply this? How do you recommend this for people, let's say, who've got a lot of things that they've gotten going pretty well, and they're looking for the fine nuances. They're looking actually to be a little bit more responsible vis-a-vis themselves and certain things, maybe not to get too jaded, not to get to this, that, or the other, and to really even more walk their talk, more show up. How would you, share this with high performers?
That's a great question. And to be honest with you, David, my advice would be identical for a high performer and for somebody that might see themselves as struggling. Because here's the deal. Yeah. Success is 100% completely subjective, right? What you and I perceive as success, or a high achiever, let's use your exact words, someone else might look at that. You and I might say, wow, that guy is amazing, or that woman is amazing. I would love to use them as a role model, and let me figure out what they're doing. And then the next guy might look at that person and say, my God, what a nightmare of a life that is. I pray for them, right? I feel for them. And I think that there's really something there to think about for people, that success and failure is completely subjective. So again, this goes back to focusing on your relationship with yourself. Again, not in a vain way or a self-serving narcissistic way, but in the most loving, spiritual, you want to always be serving, right? I mean, the way I look at all of these 5 relationships is, how can I serve? That's the question I'm always asking myself in my faith, in my fitness, in my family, friends, and in my finance. Mm-hmm. I think you ask a really important question there, and I think I know what your train of thought is, because you and I have had some conversations around this beyond this call. So let's just talk about finance for a minute, because I think that there's an overwhelming idea or paradigm that success ties to, you got a bunch of money in the bank and there's a bunch of zeros in your bank account, right? But the harsh reality is that I know a lot of people, and I talk about this in the book. I don't give names, but I talk about some examples of people that I know close and I'm close with, that have a ton of money and a ton of success in their business, but they're divorced 3 times. Their health is struggling. They really, truly, and honestly don't have a really tight-knit group of friends. So it appears to the outsider looking in that there's all this success going on because this guy's playing at the top of his game in his industry. He's driving nice cars. He's flying around the world. But if you look a little deeper and you look under the hood of that car, there's all kinds of issues going on at home. And I don't say this in a judgmental way. Again, I'm speaking from experience. When I started this process of figuring out and writing this book and coming up with these tools to share with the viewer and the readers, I had to call bullshit on myself. I was telling myself, okay, Brian, this is how you're saying you prioritize these things. For example, faith. I was saying, yeah, you know what? If I'm in tune spiritually, everything else is great. But at the end of the day, I looked at my calendar and I was spending about 5 to 10 minutes a day on self-love and nurturing and my faith and my spirituality. So I had to say bullshit, right? I mean, I can't, you can only fool yourself for so long, right? And that's really all that matters. People are going to perceive, people are very intuitive and they're going to know whether you're walking your talk or not, or you can only fake it for so long. You know, that fake it till you make it, I think is probably the worst saying that I've ever heard. Because people are going to read through that real quick, and people are intuitive. And at the end of the day, it's about nurturing and loving on yourself. And I give some tools in all 5 of the areas that all tie back to loving on and nurturing yourself. And I think that's the takeaway.
That's amazing. I love to hear that because, you know, we so lose sight of that when we spend time with people in professional circles, for example, that we feel potentially we're comparing to, or, you know, everyone is always like, our head wants to position people, right? That this person's ahead of us, this person's behind us. And it's like we have a little sliver of their life. You know, we have that one slice, we don't have all the other pieces. And gosh, the last thing I ever want is to project on anyone, obviously, just like you. You know, let's have more people that have these 5 things humming at a good level, but that's their, you know, personal take on this, their priorities. You know, here James here is given his priority, his 5 priorities here, you know, that everyone has those, you know, certainly in a, you know, ongoing dynamic way, their priorities set up, so that they don't, you know, ruin different parts of their life that they don't want to intentionally ruin. I remember reading your book, this guy who came up to you and said that, you know, I think it was, he said his wife is leaving him. And it's like he didn't even see this coming, you know, and then you asked him something like, well, do you spend a lot of time with her? You know, very high performer, working long hours. And he couldn't really say yes. And even if he does, he's lost in thought and lost in the business, and, you know, hasn't had the relationship clarity that enables that to actually happen. Because sure, you can work a lot and go through periods of sacrifice if you're really there and engaged and you're doing everything possible to have your other levers kind of balanced. But it is a really tricky path. But I think we have a tendency to admire people on social media in particular and in television, where we see a little slice of their life, and firstly, we don't appreciate what they've done maybe to get where they are, and think that, you know, why aren't I like this, right? This great thing. Well, did you put in the work that this person put in? Have you had the failures that this person has had? Have you sacrificed and probably ruined your health? I know a lot of high performers who've gone through a lot of, you know, health stuff, permanent health stuff, that they can't retrieve anymore. They pushed it so far. Others who've just ruined their families, so they pushed it too far. These are what people would look like from the outside as successful, happy, smart, intelligent, you know, people who are sociable and friendly and appear, you know, open and generous, and yet they fucked everything up. I mean, it's like, how did that happen?
Yeah. So I am. Let's use Brad Pitt for an example. I just read an article on him, not judging him, just using a real life example of to support what you just said, David. I mean, in the article, he's talking about, you know, going through his second divorce. He's losing all of his children. He's, again, everyone looking at, you know, especially these Hollywood types, which I know you grew up in that environment, David, so you would know better than anyone. I feel for him. I mean, he's in a real shitty place. He's depressed. He's in the middle of losing his second wife. He's losing all of his children, or maybe not losing them, but his life is going to look very different in the time that he gets to spend with his own flesh and blood. I mean, as a new father, that makes my stomach wrench when I think about families breaking apart. I mean, we all know, and we've all dealt with, and can all relate to either our friends or family going through a divorce. But I mean, that breaks my heart, and that's what I'm talking about. Where, look, we all have these 5 things we're dealing with, and success is 100% subjective. So don't worry about what everyone else is doing. Let's hyper focus on yourself, again, in a very loving and serving way, so that you can go out and be the best friend, father, husband, brother, sister, whatever those relationships are. And in your business, you can serve your communities. Because to be honest with you, I mean, that's the only thing that's going to make it sustainable. I mean, if you're not in service in your business, it's not going to be sustainable anyway, in my opinion. Value, you're compensated by the value that you give the world. So I think for it to be sustainable and for it to be enjoyable, which is a big part, that there has to be this level of service.
Yeah, I'm sure you're a master at that. So this, for those of you who are joined us here and listening, we're talking about what matters most. Brian just published a few weeks ago his book. We're going to put the link in here later. But I wanted to bring him on here to really, dig a little bit more into what matters most for everyone that's watching this, to really ask yourself this question, which is kind of tricky. What really matters most in your life? And in Brian's, method framework, it's really, family, friends, faith, fitness, finances. And he jumps in there at the end to add fun and flow, which I think is great, really, really great. There were so many things that I got out of the book. I just wanted to raise up a few things. Like, a lot of the questions that you put into the book are really, really pertinent. And, we always have a tendency when we read something new, excuse me, to kind of brush over the question, right? Brush over the exercise, And, I was saying to myself, I shouldn't be doing this with this book here. The questions are too, amazing. I mean, fundamental things like what makes life worth living? What makes life worth living? That sounds like, the totalist, generalist, silly question. And that's like so fundamental, right? How do we achieve lasting, meaningful happiness and to live a meaningful life? How do we trust ourselves more? That's huge. How do we trust ourselves more? All these promises we make about new habits, new choices, not going to be distracted by this. I'm not going to be spending so much time on that. I'm going to, go to the gym, all these things that we're setting up for ourselves. How do we trust that more? How do we trust more our instincts? Oh my gosh, that's a huge one. What does being a student of and for life mean to you? Huge. What does it mean to be a man in today's Western world?
Or a woman.
Or a woman in this world, absolutely. What is self-love for you? How can we improve our self-love, our self-belief, and stop listening to the criticizer in us and in others? This great thing about, why do we accept far less than we're capable of? This whole concept and reality of, why are we so afraid to shine? To bring what's so amazing about us into every moment of our lives and our relationships. Such a great question, great direction to put someone into. Are you able to forgive yourself easily? Another great question from the book. Are you able to forgive yourself easily and move on? Once you forgive yourself, it enables kind of everyone else to, right? What makes you happy? Sounds like the silliest question on the planet. It's so primary. You
can go down a rabbit hole with that one.
Good journaling thing. So I think there's a lot of really great things that you've guided the people to, and very practical things also, which I think are really, really awesome in the book. And also use a lot of the stories that you're telling in there is really amazing, including your own stories that you shared. I actually resonate with quite a bit of this stuff that you told about your period of going from grammar to high school.
Yeah.
Maybe you can tell a little bit about that moment, and also maybe share with me why do you feel that's such a it's such a certainly for me it's such an impactful way of how I still see the world today. And I'm not saying I follow that way of being or doing, but there's something emotional that happened in that time that changed who I was. Now, gratefully so, it turned me into who I am today.
Yep.
But on the other side, there's something really critical about that shift. And I think you had it also. And I feel like a lot of people in this period from grammar school to high school, this is, 12 to the 13, 14 age for anyone who's in a different kind of system. But something really traumatic, seemingly, that happens at that moment in life for a lot of us.
Yeah, I mean, looking back on it, David, there's some physiological stuff that's going on when you're turning a teenager, and it's straight up science, right? And I'm not an intellect or a science guy, but looking back on it, that's a real pivotal time for men and women, especially. Going through basically the shit hit the fan for me when I turned 13, or it started to, and I went completely off the rails. And so I talk about it in the book in depth, but from 13 till about I was 23, so it was like a full-on decade of just complete chaos, debauchery, started doing drugs, started drinking heavily, started selling drugs, started sleeping with as many women as I possibly could, and all of that. And then I started getting arrested a lot too, which doesn't ever end well. All of that decade culminated when I turned about 21 years old. I actually got two different women pregnant in a 6-month time frame, neither of which I was in love with, and neither of which I ended up having the babies with. So both of those pregnancies, unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, they ended in abortions. And that 6-month period in my life when I was 21 and dealt with having 2 abortions with 2 different women sent me into the deepest, darkest place of my life that I hope no one ever has to go through. But here's the reality. I don't share that with you to scare you or because I'm proud of it. I share that with you because everyone has a story, right? There's this hero's journey in life that everyone can relate to. Everyone has these ups and downs. And so I've gotten to the point in my life where I'm more excited about loving and serving, and I'm not as worried about being judged by sharing this stuff with people, because I think that everyone can relate in their own way, in their own life, to these ups and downs. So I'm hoping to help people give themselves permission to look back at their past and say, what have I not forgiven myself for? I thought, David, that I had forgiven myself for these abortions. This is 20 years ago, right? I mean, I have a family now. I have a loving, nurturing wife, and I have 2 beautiful boys. And I thought I had moved on from that. And then going into writing this writing creative process and sharing my story and writing this book, all of this shit came back up, all of these emotions. I hadn't shared some of these things with the people that I love most, my parents, who I'm very close with, my wife. I didn't go into the detail that I should have. And so it really opened me up. It opened up, by me opening up and making myself vulnerable and sharing this deep, dark shit that I was dealing with, or had dealt with in the past. Now my relationship with my father, I took him away and actually gave a talk on a stage in Vancouver. He's in the audience hearing all this stuff out of my mouth for the first time. He had no idea that I had 2 abortions 20 years ago. And the loving, nurturing response that I got from him sent our relationship so deep now. I have such a different connection with him. And this is, it's my father I'm talking about, right? My mother, same thing. I shared with her, I shared with my mother what I went through with these abortions, and she looked at me without hesitation and she said, Brian, I just wish you had told me when it happened so I could have been there for you. I could have been praying for my unborn grandchildren. I mean, the most loving, nurturing response that you could get from your parents, right? sharing this deep, dark stuff with my wife. Her and I already had a great, loving, nurturing, open, communicative relationship. And since I've opened up and shared these things with her, we've gone, again, so much deeper than we ever thought that we knew possible. And in turn, she's opened up to me. My wife has opened up to me and said, yeah, I went through this when I was this age, and, I sort of buried it. It was sort of lingering under there. And that stuff really, really has a really profound impact on our lives moving forward, on our health, on these 5 Fs, all of these relationships and how we approach conversations. So that's why I put faith and self-love and self-forgiveness first, because at the end of the day, if we don't get in a healthy place with ourselves, those other relationships are really going to not be able to blossom. Some of them are going to suffer, is the harsh reality of it. So I found that, opening up and sharing my story, everyone listening and all the readers, you don't need to go out and write a book, and you don't need to do a Facebook Live. Maybe you just need to have a conversation with your wife or your husband tonight, or your son or your daughter, or whoever it is that you really care about and want to go deep with, and say, this is what I'm dealing with, or this is what's happened in the past. I feel like I just want to open up to you. I love you. I want to nurture our relationship. And just by approaching the people that you love most with this idea the walls are going to come down, and the communication and the love will flow. I mean, I'm just speaking from experience. I don't live in a bubble. I don't want it to sound like I have it all figured out, because the reality is I don't. But I am hyper and super conscious of how I prioritize these things and how I invest my time. And if I can give anyone any gift or serve any of the readers or listeners, is to give yourself the space to do that. So the tool that I talk about, and I don't want to prescribe, but I do want to speak from experience. And I know, David, you'll relate to this, and some of the people that I believe to be very successful and balanced in life in these 5 relationships use this tool of what we call meditation. And you can call it meditation, you can call it prayer time, you can call it quiet time. But in order for you to take a step back and answer those questions, those list of questions that David went down, that you just listed all those questions from the book, if you're not giving yourself daily time to be quiet, I call it meditation, you call it whatever you want, you're really going to have a hard time in being able to give those questions the time that they deserve. Give yourself the time that you deserve. And then, again, that will be parlayed into all these external relationships with family, friends, your business, your finances. So it really, really starts with, getting quiet on a daily basis. That might scare the shit out of you at first. Anyone listening or reading the book, the idea, there's actually a French philosopher, and I'm going to butcher his name. I believe it's the way you say it is Blaise Pascal. Do you know him?
Blaise Pascal.
Yeah, Pascal. I love how you say that. His saying is this: all of men's problems stem from his inability to sit alone in a room with himself for 5 minutes. I quote that in the book, and I think it's one of the most brilliant but simple statements for everyone to stop and get comfortable with sitting quietly with themselves, men and women, children. It's taken, I've had a meditation and yoga practice for 20 years now. So for me, it's part of my lifestyle. But I remember in the beginning, I was scared shit. I actually would physically shake and make myself, I'd fill myself with anxiety with the idea of having to go and sit down and be quiet with myself. That's just where I was when I was 20, 23, 24, 25 years old. I think a lot of people can relate to that. And this has nothing to do with age or religion or any of that. The takeaway and the tool that I recommend is just to give yourself that space on a daily basis. Call it whatever you want. Call it yoga, call it meditation, call it prayer. But that will give you the space and the time and the creative energy to be able to answer the questions that David was talking about from the book.
So that's great. Thank you, Brian. I'm just looking at our time here together, which I'm crying that it's pretty much over here. And so grateful that you took some time out to spend here on the page.
Yeah.
Share this with anyone that would like to check this out. So What Matters Most, Brian's book just came out. Maybe Brian, you can tell us where you'd like us to find the book, where we can, learn more about you and all this great stuff you're bringing.
Yeah, so you can go to my page and you can download a free chapter of the book from the page and see if the message resonates with you, and then from there you can buy the book on Amazon. But it's just my URL is my name, brianscrone.com. And David, it looks like you're going to spell it for everybody. So it's brianscrone.com. And if you just go to Amazon, you can actually just type in my name or what matters most, Brian Scrone, and I'll come right up and you can order the book on Amazon. So I've had a lot of great feedback in people that have read the book. I know you have, David, and would love your feedback. Again, this is a process, not an event. I want to be here to help you and go deeper and dive into these 5 relationships. We have an accountability group on Facebook where you can ask questions, and we can help you move along and answer any questions that you have around these relationships we're talking about.
That's beautiful. Thank you for being the example that you are, the imperfect man that you are, the man that you are, the relationship person that you are, the emotionally curious and clear seeker that you are, trying to live what I would call a pure, a brave, a courageous life. I think this is really, and I feel this is how we really live a beautiful life, is, working on these things, fleshing through these things, allowing ourselves the time to work on this self-love, work on this self-growth, and be able to connect with ourselves, as you're calling it, the self-love, to be able to then have these 5 F's, as you put it, really, really humming along. So you can really actually not waste energy trapped up in things that are suppressed, that we do so much. There's so much of that going on. So I'm so grateful you're helping us, all of us, to get to that, to tenderly and smartly and even pragmatically, spend more focus on that. On really, as you say, and I love the title of your book and what you're about, man, what matters most. Because when we all start doing that better, our families are better, our life's better, our work is better, who we are in the world is better. And for me, this is how we raise everyone's lives. This is how we bring more people into this circle of life where we start to really focus on what matters most, and we don't get tripped up and conditioned and tricked into the sort of trompe-l'oeil of life, right? Where we're living in this scarcity and this fear, and we're making bad buying decisions in our life, and we're not focusing really on what matters most. So thank you for bringing this to the world. I look so much forward to seeing where else you bring this. You got a fan here.
I appreciate it so much, David, and thank you for letting me share with your community.
All right, man.
Big love. Thank you.
Ciao. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you around.